first speaker is the partner and lead, Digital Transformation, KPMG in Africa. He is responsible for driving KPMG's digital and fintech agenda across the continent. He will be discussing key insights from the Digital Channel Scorecard. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Boye Ademola.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us for the KPMG Digital Channels 2020 webinar. The COVID pandemic has necessitated the need to accelerate digital across many businesses. One of the things that COVID is basically necessitating is the need to be able to run businesses completely off the channels. In other words, businesses today, as one of the enduring responses to COVID, have to be able to run their businesses off the channels. The channels are the end point on all that we're doing from a digital transformation perspective. So what I'm going to do in the next few minutes is to essentially share with you insights gleaned from the Digital Channel Scorecard review of 17 different retail banks in Nigeria. I will share with you our methodology, but more importantly, I will share with you the insights gleaned, from this review. And at the end of my session, I will ask a panel of those who were very intrinsic in performing the reviews to also expound on some of the insights from the work. So let's dive into it. I think the first point on COVID is quite clear. And I will just go straight into looking at how we approached it. We approached this review from a customer perspective, all right? It's important to distinguish the fact that we're building on our banking industry customer satisfaction survey that we've done for over 10 years now. When we do the BICS, we survey customers and essentially present the voice of the customer. The Digital Channel Scorecard is looking at this from another lens, and this is from the lens of the banks themselves and the capabilities that the banks offer on their digital channels. Like I said, from a customer perspective, the channels, we believe, are the endpoint on all that we're doing from a digital or digital transformation perspective. So then we focused on looking at 13 different journeys, and we grouped them into 5 thematic areas. We looked at digital onboarding, the ability for banks to onboard customers end-to-end digitally without requiring the customers to go to the bank or have any physical interaction. We looked at payments and transfers. We looked at digital lending, and then we looked at self-service. And the last anchor journey that we looked at, the thematic area that we looked at, is customer care or customer service. So we looked at these 5 journeys largely from a customer perspective. We reviewed the channels of the banks using these experiences that any customer at the time of our review will also experience. And then we focused on 4 important channels. They are by no means the only channels. But from this review, our focus was on mobile, USSD, internet banking, and chatbots. In terms of the scorecard itself, we used our UX assessment framework. And that framework essentially, has a number of criteria for assessing user journeys. One of the very important criteria is functionality. A functionality has to work to deliver a service to a customer. When a customer comes cannot perform the service or get the result that they want, then the experience is frustrating. Minimalism is about channels being simple and intuitive, easy to discover for customers when they go on your site. Efficiency is what we call interaction cost, the number of clicks. So the less or the fewer the clicks, then the more efficient you are. Personalization, really important, about creating contextual experiences for customers. And then consistency and aesthetics. As we did this review, we essentially plotted the emotions of users as they go through the channels of the banks. And these emotions, when the functionality and the experience is top-notch, then users are excited. They ultimately become advocates, brand ambassadors for that institution. At the extreme end, if they're unable to get what they want, then they will be frustrated. So this essentially is the framework that we use. So just to help us, what I've done here is to show an indicative journey. All right, so this is an indicative journey. One of the journey, just one, and how these journeys look for each bank. So here, for instance, a user is trying to do a funds transfer, and he discovers, the funds transfer icon, but at some point is unable to do his transaction because he experiences challenges around authentication. So he starts off as indifferent from a user perspective, ends up frustrated. All right, this is just an example. So we then created these journey maps for each of the 13 journeys we looked at across the 17 banks for each of the channel that we looked at. And at the end, we then moderated, looking at, looking at the experience for customers for the different journeys for each of the bank. We then moderated the scores. We looked at outliers, and we essentially compared and benchmarked to be sure that, there's a balance in the scoring. So here is how we've then categorized every bank for every journey and on every channel. We have the leaders, and the leaders category really are banks in a particular journey that are able to deliver that journey, first of all, end-to-end digitally, but also they are delivering delightful experience to customers. At the extreme end are the late starters. The late starters generally have not deployed that functionality for one reason or the other. Or perhaps I've tried to start the functionality, but the functionality really, very quickly, the user experiences breakages in the journey and can't continue. The challengers are those who deliver this functionality but come short on experience. The challengers we found are quite close to the leaders. And then the followers are people that are delivering this functionality but need to deal with things like asking customers to go to the branch, transferring them to the call center, or making a demand on a requirement on the customers to use their debit cards when debit cards have not been issued for them to complete a transaction. So these essentially are the 4 categories in the scorecard. So in this section, I will just speak a bit about the output of the scorecard, the insights of the scorecard. One of the first things, that is clear to us from reviewing the industry is that digital onboarding continues to be a challenge. 85% of the banks that we looked at were unable to onboard customers digitally end-to-end at the time that we did this review, which was between May and July 2020. So think about that number, 85%. So most of the banks are unable to onboard customers digitally end-to-end. And there are a number of reasons for this. However, we still found banks in the leadership tier here. And for this is Standard Chartered Bank on mobile banking. For USSD, it's Zenith Bank and Stanbic IBTC. The next major journey we looked at payments and transfer. And as you will expect, this is an area that banks did quite well in terms of the capability. We have a lot of maturity in this area. And indeed, we can see that there's a lot of innovation on top of payments and transfers that we're seeing in our market. The lead for mobile banking, Wema and GT Bank, and for internet banking, Wema Bank, and then USSD, GT Bank. We looked at digital lending, and again, digital lending is an area where banks are really very nascent in terms of the evolution. We think that there is an opportunity, perhaps the time may be right with the global standing instruction, the proliferation of data, and the emergence of AI to really look at this opportunity. We see a country like Kenya, which was like Nigeria for many years, the penetration of retail lending was very low. And then Kenya Commercial Bank, NCBA, and Safaricom partnered together to develop a product called Fuliza. And in 1 year, Fuliza had covered over 10 million users. So this is an example of the opportunity that we see from a digital lending perspective. We will discuss this in a bit more details when we go into the panel session. The self-service agenda and the scorecard for self-service is really important. Self-service is about empowering customers to essentially enjoy banking services on the channels, anywhere they are. And it's really important when you think about moving customers from the branches to the channels. It reduces the cost to serve. It has opportunities to generate revenues from value-added services. And frankly speaking, it improves the experience. Examples of things in what we call self-services will be customers managing their cards, requesting for a card, turning off their card, requesting for a statement, and the different things that customers want to do at the branches or with their bank. But what's interesting is that on average, 75% of banks that we assessed do not have sufficiently robust self-service features from the review that we did. So it's an area where there is a lot of opportunity, all right, to digitize for the banks to essentially move, the play from brick and mortar to the channels. The leaders for mobile banking, Wema, Access, and Standard Chartered Bank, and for chatbot, Fidelity Bank. The last journey that we looked at was the customer care journey. And here, again, banks here, we have different levels of maturity. Generally, we see that contact centers have been implemented, but the key challenges will be around responsiveness. It will be around scale, because as you scale retail, then you ask yourself how many people are going to man those contact centers. So again, the digitizing of it, the introduction of chatbots or virtual assistants are things that, banks have an opportunity to look at in this area. From a mobile banking perspective, our leader was Wema Bank, and from a chatbot perspective, the leader was Fidelity Bank. So these are the 5 anchor journeys. We call them thematic areas that we looked at. Remember, this is from a customer perspective. In the next slide, I will then sort of summarize on a channel basis how we saw the banks. So from a channel perspective, mobile banking, again, we will look at each channel and we will look at, from that channel perspective, what bank essentially was in the leadership categories across the different customer journeys. And on an overall basis, the leader for mobile banking is Alert by Wema. Alert comes tops, leader in the payments and transfer journey, leader in self-service, leader from a customer care journey perspective, and was a challenger in the digital onboarding category. The next one is USSD. And for USSD, it was interesting because we've done a lot in payments and transfers. But on an overall basis, the team really felt that there was no leader particularly because we haven't really seen banks extend the capabilities of this channel into other journeys. We had 6 challengers led by Guaranty Trust Bank in this category. For internet banking, again, we did not see any leader. We see from just engaging with the banks that because the traffic is largely on mobile and USSD in our markets, it appears that banks may not be investing in their internet banking channel. So we did not see any leader for internet banking. We have one challenger, Alert Online by Wema Bank. And finally, the last channel is chatbots. And for the chatbots in this category, the leader is Ivy by Fidelity Bank. Ivy led in self-service, Ivy led in customer care, and was the challenger from a digital onboarding perspective. This is also an area where we think banks have an opportunity to invest a bit more in chatbots, particularly given the millennials, and also to ensure that the cost of engagement can come down, leveraging virtual assistant, chatbots, and the likes, to engage with customers. All right, so for us, as we then sat back and looked at this, we said to ourselves, what exactly really is the next frontier from where the banks are? It's clear banks have made a lot of progress, but what are the things that banks need to focus on? In terms of COVID itself, which in itself is an opportunity to accelerate the digital agenda, for us there are 3 things. The user-centered journeys is one of these things. It's the whole concept around designing around the user, the concepts around design thinking, the concepts around prototyping before we start building solutions. It's the concept that challenges adding functionality and functionality and functionality to channels until everything becomes clunky and unwieldy. So it's important that we design around the customer. I think that's important. One of the things that we believe is the next frontier for banks. The other one is around the omni-channel concept. We think omni-channel is still relevant, particularly because we saw that banks would deliver a functionality on the channel very well. Same functionality on another channel is not even existent or is delivered poorly. And that's the omni-channel concept. It's around delivering products and services to customers regardless of the channel they choose to engage with. And then the last one is around personalization and being more contextual as we engage with our clients.